right, guys, welcome to Los Angeles. Thank you so much for checking it out. No guest this week, but I really wanted to jump on today and talk a little bit about all the updates with Dan Snyder and the Washington Commanders. So, if you don't know, I'm a recovering Washington football team fan. Not a big fan of the Commanders name, and absolutely not a big fan of Daniel Snyder and all of his terrible escapades as the owner of the DC football team. Now, if you hadn't seen it, I made a YouTube video kind of trying to put into words my thoughts about being a fan of the Commanders earlier this year. You can check that out on YouTube. I believe it's called The Trouble with Being a Fan of the Washington Commanders. And, essentially, I made it very clear back then that I thought Dan Snyder would never sell. And as a result, I would always have to deal with controversy, criticism, shame, what have you, with supporting this team. And, things have really, really taken a turn in the last month or so. Starting with a huge article by ESPN in October of 2022, for those of you listening in the future, that kind of detailed how disliked Dan Snyder is across the league among other owners, how he's threatened other owners with, blackmail, essentially having dirt on them, and how he's, been a part of so many awful scams, both financial, workplace culture, including sexual harassment, environmental issues he's done, targeting other owners, what have you. Dan Snyder's kind of been pretty despicable for a really long time, according to this ESPN article, right? So I'm not here to really talk about that at all. Essentially, things got really crazy after this article dropped. You had another owner, Jim Irsay, basically say, it's time to get rid of Dan Snyder. We're going to get the other owners to vote him out. And then you had Dan Snyder and his attorneys coming back with, we're never going to sell. And, once the Beth Wilkinson report, which is a report that has gone on for multiple years now, that was an independent investigation into the team's workplace culture. Now, that did sort of wrap up in July of 2021. However, it was just an oral report and no results were ever made public from it. But, plenty of people, including myself, have tried to get, have wanted to get the results of that report made public for the last couple of years. Now there's a second investigation going on. Basically, all of this, seemed like it was just going to kind of go on in perpetuity, even after Irsay made the comments that he did. Like I mentioned, Dan Snyder and his attorneys fired back with, hey, no, there's nothing wrong here. And once this report comes out, which, is a follow-up investigation by, I believe her name is Mary Jo White, you'll see Jim Irsay and the rest of you that there's no reason for the Washington football team to be sold, and they won't. And all of that was seemingly just going to continue on. And, fans like myself had sort of given up on ever having a new owner as long as we live. And lo and behold, on November 2nd, 2022, Dan Snyder came out. Well, I'll take a step back. There was a report by Forbes that Dan Snyder and contracted Bank of America to explore all options selling the team. Now, whether that is a minority stake or the entire thing remains to be seen. But at this time, that is the closest we've gotten to ever seeing Dan Snyder sell the organization, which is, a dream for many fans like myself. Just for a long time, I, as a fan, really thought Dan Snyder was just an impediment to winning, that he was just too much of a meddling owner and he was too involved in the day-to-day. He had personal relationships with all the wrong people, and he was quick and trigger happy when it came to firing good coaches and good personnel. But it's become clear in recent years that it's so much more than that. He has a lot of really bad relationships with really respected people. He's quick to kind of get out anyone who is deemed respectable across the league, and coaches and players don't really want to, make their mark here. They don't want to stay here. And, it's caused a lot of trouble for a long time. And then when you add on that, he has been a part of some very serious sexual harassment allegations, as well as bullying and intimidation tactics, as well as apparently, threatening to blackmail other owners and, skimming money away from the customers, from the people of Washington, D.C. And just as a fan, I always kind of had the feeling I was being milked for money when I went to games when I was younger. I stopped going to games a few years ago just because experience really wasn't worth the hassle. And I always kind of felt like I was just lining the pockets of abhorrent people. So yeah, I'd kind of given up for a long time. Kind of said that I was done really supporting the team financially until Dan Snyder left. I had no idea that this was something that could actually happen on the horizon. It was just kind of a long shot. But I want to go back to what I mentioned before is just because the Snyder family has, you know, contracted Bank of America to explore all options on the team doesn't necessarily mean they're going to sell the team. I do think that Dan Snyder will go on to sell the Washington football team or the Commanders. I really hope we get a new owner and a new name. My reason for that is I think a lot of people may not fully understand, and even I don't really, Dan Snyder's financial situation. And I think Dan Snyder is a rich person. He is a billionaire, and rich people often keep their money not stacked underneath their mattress, but they like to invest it, right? They like to invest it in um, stocks, index funds, whatever, so that money continues to grow, right? So if you're Dan Snyder, you're probably not pulling cash out of from under your mattress every time you go to make a purchase. You're probably buying on margin. You're probably taking loans against investments you have out there. And for those of you that don't know a ton about margin lending or what have you, essentially just think of it simply, and keep in mind I'm not a business expert by any means, so I'll give it a shot with my poli-sci and cybersecurity degree to try and explain it. But if I have $1 billion in stock in Apple, it's a lot better for me to go get a loan and leverage that $1 billion of stock in Apple at a much lower rate than it would be for me to start selling off those shares if I need cash, because then I'm going to have to pay capital gains tax. So I could probably work with the bank, offer that up as collateral in case I can't make my payments, and get myself a nice little loan. So the thing about margin lending is it works really, really well on the way up. And for the last 13 years or so, we've seen the stock market go up and up. We've seen a lot of people make a lot of money on investments. It doesn't work that well on the way down. So as we start to head into this recession, as the market has started to kind of erase a lot of the gains that people have seen the last few years, I think that people who might not have been in the best financial situations, and by that I mean Dan Snyder doesn't really have a lot of income streams outside of the Washington football team and his investments. He doesn't have another business to lean on for kind of a cash flow purpose. And as far as I know he owned Johnny Rockets and Six Flags at one point. I don't believe he does anymore. I know he owned a expansion rights to an arena football league team. I don't think that's making much money. The point is, if he doesn't have any money coming in, and the value of his investments is starting to go down, he might be facing what's called a margin call, where he has to start to actually make some pretty significant paybacks for loans he's taken out. And I think it's pretty obvious that he's probably taken out quite a few loans. We already know that he went to the other owners a couple of years ago to buy out his minority shareholders. He had to get a debt waiver, and essentially the other owners in the NFL loaned him the money. We know he recently bought a $150 million yacht, which I'm sure also includes, employees, staff, things to put on the yacht, right? Like, I don't know, chairs, dining room sets, a lot of expensive things, right? It's probably more than 150 million. He just bought a $50 million house in, I want to say Mount Vernon, and still owns his house in Potomac, Maryland, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe it's more likely than not, since he bought these things in cash, right? He didn't finance them. He probably took advantage of, buying on margin, right? He probably, got cash that way. And if he's leveraged as much as I think he might be, I think he really, really could be in a situation where he has to sell the team. And I think all of it because of the fact that he's going to need the support of the other owners for whoever he sells it to, right? Even if he wanted to bring in minority owners, he would need the, remaining owners to approve of that, especially because he owes them money for the remaining shares. And I don't think they're going to put up with that. I don't think they'd approve him to, make a couple billion here and there to bring in some minority owners and help prop up his business anymore. I think it's very telling that they said they're going to explore all option. And I think that a lot of the money out there isn't interested in being a partner with Dan Snyder at this point. They'd much rather just overpay for the organization and get him out of there and run it the way they want. So I do think it's forthcoming. Now, I really want to talk about how I think this all came about, because if you'd asked me a month ago, I would have thought, hey, the Mary Jo White report that is going to come out is either going to do one of two things, right? It's either going to be so hard it puts Dan Snyder in a position where he has to sell. It's going to be, bombshells. It's going to be, you know, situations that implicate him criminally or in really, really bad light, where there's a situation that the NFL cannot do anything but force him to sell. Or it's going to be kind of a non, where it's not really going to have anything with teeth, and it's gonna paint Dan Snyder in the same light we've always seen him, but not necessarily in a situation where he'd have to sell. And I really lean toward the latter. I really thought Goodell would sort of whitewash any investigation that came out in support of Dan Snyder. This was just kind of me from gathering information. Now, I don't know what changed or if anything changed, but it seems like something happened between when the ESPN article dropped last month and when the Snyder family apparently started exploring the options of selling the team. There's stories that it could have been some blowback against his wife Tanya at one of the games. Maybe he had conversations with his family or other people around him, and it's really not a bad deal to walk away with what looks like it could be $7 billion. And of course, he's going to have to pay back, the loan he took out against the NFL, and make right with all of his margin calls or what have you. But overall, I think it's probably in his best interest to just sell the team and move on with his life. Now, all of that being said, it felt like we were kind of on pace to get what we wanted as DC fans. Hopefully, get an owner that's just less embarrassing and a lot more effective at winning. That was until Thursday, when the Attorney General Karl Racine in Washington, D.C. Came out with a press conference saying he was suing Dan Snyder, Roger Goodell, and the NFL and the Washington Commanders. I'll actually take a step back. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me and hilarious. So if you didn't follow, the Attorney General made an announcement Wednesday that he was going to have a press conference Thursday with some big news against the Washington Commanders. And hilariously enough, the Washington Commanders organization that just cannot get out of their own way, that makes every mistake in the book, fired off an unbelievable response where they essentially used their player, Brian Robinson, running back for the Washington Commanders, who was tragically shot twice in the leg earlier this year in Washington, D.C. on 8th Street, basically tried to blame the Attorney General for that, saying, it's sad that the Attorney General is wasting his time with, a big press conference against the Commanders when one of our players got shot in his city because he's so bad at controlling violent crime. And the most hilarious part to me is if Attorney General Karl Racine had just canceled his press conference right after that, tweet went out, he would have come out the winner on top. He would have totally won and had not done a single thing. It would have been absolutely hilarious, because the blowback has been insane against that tweet, right? Against that response by the Washington Commanders organization, trying to use one of their players as a shield. It's pissed off, journalists, it's pissed off fans, and it's pissed off the actual players. Benjamin St. Juste, cornerback for the Washington Commanders, came out and said, as much, that he really didn't like to hear that. I don't have his exact words, but you have that. Plus you have other reports that, team members are not happy with it. They want a fresh start. They feel that there's a dark cloud over the organization amid all of this controversy. And, unfortunately, the press conference kind of was just a rehashing of everything we already knew about Dan Snyder. There was no new information as far as I could tell. I followed this stuff pretty closely, and I don't think there was anything there. This lawsuit seems kind of silly to me, essentially arguing under a Consumer Protection Act that the Washington Commanders violated this Consumer Protection Act because they hid the fact that they were, manifesting a sexually harassing organization or a toxic workplace or what have you. Doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. Otherwise, I feel like lawsuits are in order for tons of companies out there. It's just some sort of like a political stunt for Racine, sadly, and I kind of wish that there was a little more meat there, and that it seemed a little more genuine and a little less, you know, built up for Racine's kind of political career. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a lot of people out there thought it was something pretty special and that they were going to get out of a lot of it. I'm just worried that I think we I think the best way for us to get what we want as fans, and obviously I want people to be brought to justice who did something wrong or what have you. I can't foresee a situation where that happens with something as powerful as the NFL and someone as rich as Dan Snyder. But for us as fans, we really just want to see him out of there, and that's kind of one of the most important things for us. We'll see what happens next, but I don't think continuing to pile on, continuing to threaten legal action, and maybe just showing Dan Snyder that this stuff's not going to go away is the best way to get it. He's pretty safe, if you ask me, while he's aligned with the other owners in the NFL. And if he for a second thinks anything but selling the team solves all his problems, then I don't see why he would sell the team, right? I'm sure Goodell and the other owners will want him out. Anyone that's kind of close to him has sort of told him they think and they feel that, once he sells the team, he can just go live his life in anonymity and he can be quiet and be happy, and everyone will leave him alone. He won't be named in lawsuits and what have you. And we just kind of showed otherwise. And obviously, I want him to pay for any injustices he might have carried out. If he's committed any crimes, he should absolutely be held accountable for them. I just, I've lived in this country a long time, and I don't necessarily see a situation where that might happen. Now, as far as my thoughts kind of on the whole thing go, it's tough to imagine this carries out as quickly as I would like. I do think we'll start to hear more and more about owners and offers that put packages that are being put together. And I do think eventually, there'll be an offer too good to refuse for Dan Snyder. I think there will be partnerships available to him at some level that kind of keep him satiated and make him feel like he'll still be involved in the organization once he sells. I'm sure that's important to him. I think he'll be offered a ton of money that will be great for him and his family, and he can kind of carry on living his life and go after whatever entrepreneurial item he wants to do next. But I think, Kevin Sheehan has made a point in the past that the reason Dan Snyder doesn't want to sell is he doesn't want to just be another rich billionaire, right? The owning an NFL team comes with the benefit of essentially celebrity status, right? Like, you get to hang out with pro athletes. You get to have Tom Cruise and Matthew McConaughey in your suite, right? You get to, assume a second, you get to assume an identity that isn't afforded to a lot of people because you're so powerful in an aspirational industry, right? He's obviously used it to, build connections with, young girls, and some of them have come out and accused him of things that are pretty nefarious. And I don't think that happens as easily if you're just a rich guy. I'm sure it's easy, but it's not on this level of simple for him, where he can kind of use the guise of everything for his NFL team. And I'm sure he likes that. But I think, all these reports that have come out, all these investigations, has taken a lot of that away from him. And I think he is probably, over it at this point. He's probably over playing it super safe. He wants to just do what he wants and be out of the limelight in my mind. And so I do think he will eventually sell the team. It's my hope. I hope it happens fairly quickly. And I hope that whoever the new owner is can kind of bring the team just back to something that isn't embarrassing. I've been really, really humiliated to follow this team and be a fan of this team for a long time. And it's taken away my interest in spending money on them, my interest in the games. I don't watch them like I used to. I used to be a huge fan, and I spent a lot of time talking about it and going over games and recapping things with my family and my friends, and just haven't really been able to do that in the last couple of years. If we get a new owner, I'd love to see a new name. I still think everyone would love to see Hogs or Red Hogs or something of that nature, just to kind of harken back to the team we grew up loving instead of this expansion team we're dealing with right now. And, it'd be kind of cool to see an owner that is capable of spending money in this new kind of guaranteed contract world. And I like to point that out because Dan Snyder used to be known for, uh, big spending, right, in free agency or what have you. But we've moved to a time where players are now getting a lot of guaranteed contracts, especially quarterbacks. And we kind of saw this with Terry McLaurin. It went a really long time without anything being reached. And from my understanding, if an NFL team wants to sign a player to a fully guaranteed contract, they need to put the cash value of that contract in escrow. So a third party needs to manage that money for the entirety of the contract. So, if you want to sign Lamar Jackson to a fully guaranteed $350 million deal in the offseason, you have to plop down $350 million cash. There's no getting around it. You can't just make payments over time. And if you're an owner with cash flow trouble, which you might be if you're having to, leverage debt, get debt waivers from the rest of the NFL in order to buy out your minority shareholders, probably going to have some trouble doing that. And, if someone like Jeff Bezos buys the Washington Commanders, I don't think he would have any difficulty with that. So that'd be pretty cool as well. So, I mean, listen, there's kind of a lot going on here. I really wonder what is kind of in store for us. I do certainly think the most, I don't know, the most motivating factor, I guess, for Dan Snyder to tell the team would probably be his family's interest. If his kids and his wife said they were tired of the headache and they didn't want to deal with it anymore, if whomever was close to him kind of felt the same way, I can't see why he'd want to stick around and fight at that point. Why would you want to do something that's going to push your family away? I imagine from all the reports that come out, he has difficulty trusting a lot of people closest to him. So I'm sure family is really important to Dan Snyder, and I think it's probably for the best interest of them as well as him to sell, and I think he's gonna get a lot out of it. As well as in a weird, warped kind of way, he'll end up kind of being the hero of DC if he just sells, since we never thought that ever was going to happen. So listen, I don't know Dan Snyder. I've never met him. I've heard some stories, but you never know someone or what have you. But I've just kind of been a fan of this team for a long time. It's been pretty bad, man. It's been real embarrassing, and I really like to think that with a different owner, there's a potential for the team to be good again. There's a potential for me to have fun again, and that's really all I really want as a fan. So anyway, that's kind of what I wanted to talk to today. Again, I don't think there's going to be any major stories coming out. I think the fact that Dan Snyder is out here exploring a sale sort of nips in the bud any chance or opportunity there might be for a really, really juicy or crazy story to leak. I think everything we know from the years of Washington Post articles or conversations that have been are already pretty bad. If there was anything worse out there, I wonder if hints of it would leak or what have you. But I hope you guys have some time to listen to this and kind of understand if you're interested in this topic. There's tons of information out there. But I just kind of wanted to drop my thoughts on the latest information with Dan Snyder and the Washington Commanders. So we play the Eagles on Monday night. I think it's going to be a rough season for Washington, sadly. But if Dan Snyder really does sell the team, I think that hope springs eternal, and there's going to be a ton of optimism for the organization moving forward. Hopefully, we'll get a good quarterback, a cool new team name, maybe some information on a new stadium. That's the other thing. I might as well mention that. I think the stadium deal is a big deal, and I really want to point this out. Back when the ESPN article dropped, and for those that don't know, Dan Snyder and the Washington Commanders have struggled for years to reach an agreement with Maryland, DC, or Virginia on grounds for a new stadium. FedEx Field is about to be 30 years old, I believe, in a couple years. And it's time, once that contract's up, for the organization to make a new stadium. And that ESPN article essentially detailed how, for all the trouble Dan Snyder's caused the NFL, if he were to have success in building a new stadium, get a deal, get some money, and break ground on it, then all would be forgiven, right? I think that made the NFL look really bad. And I think that ESPN article kind of changed things, right? Maybe before, behind closed doors, the owners kind of said, Dan, we're not happy. We're not happy with the revenue loss. We're not happy that the fans are leaving in droves from the Washington organization. And, we're not happy that we're, having to sign debt waivers for you so you can buy out your minority owners because they can't stand you. But you bailed that stadium and everything's good. But the optics on that are really bad now that we know about the toxic workplace, now that he's been named personally in multiple lawsuits and even some more serious, almost criminal charges. Now that we know about the financial improprieties, now that we know that he's bragged about having dirt on other owners, at least that's what the ESPN article reported. I don't think the owners can just simply now say, okay, we're happy if he gets a stadium. I think he's got to go. I think that would look really bad now that we know that everybody knows how bad things are in Washington. If they were to just kind of wash their hands of it and give him that little slap of the wrist, that $10 million fine he got last year, and be cool as long as he built a stadium. And because of that, I think that they kind of have to force him out at this point. It's really gotten to that level. Now, the other side of it is I don't see a situation now that he's kind of tempted us with the selling of the team where a district or a state gives him the money he wants for lands for a stadium. Now, if they know they're this close to pushing him out, I don't see why they do a deal with him. They'd rather do a deal with someone like Jeff Bezos, I imagine, who can, also provide a ton of really high paying jobs to a state or a city if he wanted to. Or, whomever ends up buying the Washington football team at that point. So, yeah, I think for those of you worried out there, I think we're headed towards a place where Dan Snyder has no choice but to sell. I think it's best for him. It's best for everybody else. The only thing I'd be concerned about is this guy does have a tendency to be a bit of a wild card. He's a little unorthodox in some of his manners, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy who hired a QB coach and made him head coach after he hired him to be the offensive coordinator and Jim Zorn. He let his son allegedly draft a quarterback in the first round. He's brought in multiple quarterbacks that coaches didn't want. He's, stood on the table for certain guys. I don't know. Like, he does a lot of crazy, wacky things. So could he turn around and say, you know what, never mind, I don't want to sell? Maybe, but I think there's enough ammo out there where they could put a push so hard on him. He just didn't want to do this anymore. And if I were in a situation, I just want to sell and get the hell out too. So let's hope it's happening. I think it'd be pretty magical. There's always talk about how this would be our Super Bowl, how we'd throw a parade if Dan Snyder ever sold. And man, I think we might. And obviously I've got really high hopes for whatever comes next. If we got a better owner and what they'd be capable of doing, that's what I'm really after. But for now, I'll just keep these podcasts coming, I guess, because I love talking about this stuff. I love talking about the organization because I want to be back, man. I want to be a fan again. I want to have that same drive that I had when I was a kid, when I watched the Redskins at the time. And I'm really hopeful that a new owner can help bring us back to that. So, thanks again so much for checking this out. Like I mentioned earlier, I've launched my YouTube channel in the last few months. So please check out my YouTube channel at Los Angeles. I'm going to keep having some videos come out there, but thanks so much for tuning in for this podcast today, and really appreciate it. Take care, you guys.